Thanks for tuning in to Cheating Confessions. Don't miss the jaw-dropping conclusion. My name is Jessica. I've always thought of myself as a devoted wife and a loving mother. But one sunny morning in Austin, Texas, while I was decorating the backyard for a party, everything changed. Who could have imagined that a simple gesture of help would stir long-forgotten emotions inside me? How far can our hidden desires go, and how much can they alter our lives? This story is about how one accidental touch flipped my world upside down. Read on if you wish to know how this unexpected twist of fate unfolds. I was standing at the top of a wobbly ladder, stringing lights around our patio. The sun beamed brightly, casting warmth and joy across our backyard. Preparing for my daughter Sophia's birthday had always been a delightful task, even if most of the work fell on my shoulders. My husband, Ethan, who is 42, was often preoccupied with his career as a financial consultant and didn't have much time for such preparations. The ladder beneath me wobbled slightly, but I continued working, having grown accustomed to these minor disturbances. Just then, I heard a voice that startled me. "Hi, Mrs. Thompson. Do you need help?" The voice was deeper than I remembered, and when I turned around, I almost lost my balance. Standing in front of me was Nick, the son of my closest friend, Megan. "Oh, Nick, thank you. I'd really appreciate that," I responded, trying to remain calm as I descended the ladder. He stepped forward to steady it, and as our hands briefly touched, an unexpected surge of emotions rushed through me. "I just arrived and noticed you could use some help," Nick said, his eyes gleaming with a playful glint. "That's very thoughtful of you," I said, leading him toward the garden, where the rest of the decorations still awaited attention. As we worked together, I became increasingly aware of his presence. His movements were confident and graceful, and every time our hands brushed against each other by accident, my heart raced. Nick had grown into a tall, athletic young man in his early 20s. And though I knew I shouldn't be thinking about him this way, it was hard to ignore the magnetic pull between us. "How's everything going at college?" I asked, trying to ease the tension with casual conversation, though my voice betrayed a slight undertone of curiosity. "Pretty good, Mrs. Thompson. Same old mix of study and social life. But it's nice to be back in Austin." "Everything seems calmer here compared to campus," he replied while effortlessly straightening a tablecloth. I laughed, but it came out a bit nervous. "I can imagine. We've missed having you around. Sophia talks about you often." "Hopefully only the good things," he said with a sly grin, momentarily breaking the growing tension between us. "Only the best," I reassured him, our eyes meeting for a moment that felt like it could last forever. It was in that instant I realized that such a simple touch and a smile could reignite feelings I had long buried. As the day stretched into evening, shadows began to creep across the lawn, and guests started to arrive. The atmosphere became lively with chatter and laughter, yet the unspoken connection between Nick and me persisted, linking us with invisible threads. When the party officially began, I spotted Nick mingling among the guests. He quickly became the center of attention, with his easygoing charm and infectious laughter. Our paths crossed again near the drinks table. Nick, surrounded by a small group, was telling an animated story, his audience captivated by every word. As soon as he noticed me, he paused, giving me a knowing smile before handing me a glass. "Mrs. Thompson," he said with a conspiratorial grin, "saved the last of Sophia's favorite punch for you." "Thank you, Nick. I think I really need this," I replied with a nervous laugh, our fingers brushing once again as I took the glass. That same familiar spark shot through me, and I took a sip to steady myself, aware of the curious looks from the nearby guests. We gradually moved to a more private corner of the garden, where dim lights cast a cozy, intimate glow. The low hum of the party faded into the background as our conversation deepened, becoming more personal. "Jessica," he said quietly, addressing me by my first name for the first time, his voice low and warm. "What's life like out here? Is it always parties and house projects?" I chuckled, feeling unexpectedly comfortable. "Oh, it's a thrill a minute. Sometimes picking out a new wallpaper pattern feels like the highlight of the week, I joked with a grin. Nick laughed softly, his gaze holding mine a little too long. Sounds intense. Maybe you need something a bit more exciting, he suggested, his tone teasing but carrying a hint of something more. Before I could respond, my daughter Sophia's voice interrupted the moment. "Mom, there you are," she exclaimed, joining us with a light-hearted tone. "Seems like Nick's become the life of the party." Blushing, I smiled. "Sophia, you know I've always had a soft spot for Nick and his family." My voice was steady, but my heart raced, caught between the tension and excitement of the evening. Nick smiled back at Sophia, effortlessly deflecting any suspicion. "Just keeping good company, that's all." The rest of the evening felt like a whirlwind of stolen glances and brief, whispered conversations with Nick. Each interaction sent a rush of adrenaline through me, and I struggled to suppress the excitement building inside. His earlier remark about needing more excitement echoed in my mind, pushing me further out of my comfort zone. As the party wound down and guests began to leave, I was left with a mix of relief and disappointment. The night had revealed more than I expected. Saying goodbye to Nick felt more charged than it should have been. Our hands lingered for just a second too long, his touch sending a ripple of unresolved feelings through me. "Good night, Jessica," he whispered softly, his voice meant only for me. "Good night, Nick," I replied quietly, a mixture of guilt and anticipation swirling in my chest as I watched him leave. In the days that followed, I tried to return to my normal routine, but thoughts of Nick wouldn't leave me. Every time I passed by the garden or glanced at the decorations we'd hung together, our fleeting touches and conversations replayed in my mind. It was madness, I thought. How could I have let myself become infatuated with the son of my best friend? Meanwhile, Ethan, who had just turned 42, continued to immerse himself in his work as usual. Our conversations had grown more distant, revolving around household matters and discussions about Sophia, who was turning 12. What used to feel like a comfortable rhythm of life now felt stifling. I needed a change, or at least a break from my thoughts. One afternoon, I decided to visit the Magnolia Coffee House, my favourite cafe in the heart of Austin. It was always my retreat when I needed some quiet time to clear my head. As I entered, the familiar aroma of fresh coffee and pastries greeted me, soothing my restless mind. After ordering my usual cappuccino, I scanned the room for a seat, only to spot Nick sitting in the corner, typing on his laptop. My heart skipped a beat as he looked up and waved with a welcoming smile. "Jessica, what a surprise," he called out, motioning for me to join him. My heart raced as I walked over to his table, feeling the familiar blush creep up my cheeks. I tried to maintain my composure, even as my mind buzzed with a mix of excitement and anxiety. "Hi, Nick. I didn't expect to see you here," I said, sitting down across from him. "I like changing up my study spots," he replied, closing his laptop and giving me his full attention. "It helps me stay focused. Care to join me for a coffee?" "I already have mine," I said with a smile, raising my cup, trying to mask the growing tension between us. A brief but comfortable silence followed. It felt as if the tension from the party had dissipated, replaced by an unspoken connection. Nick broke the silence, leaning in slightly, lowering his voice as though he were sharing a secret. "You know, Jessica, you're not at all like I imagined Greg's wife to be." His words caught me off guard and I felt my heart skip a beat. "What do you mean?" I asked, a mix of curiosity and concern in my voice. "I don't know. I guess I expected you to be more reserved. But you're so full of life, so interesting," he said, his gaze holding mine with a depth that made me feel both flattered and nervous. I laughed softly, feeling the warmth of his compliment, though my nerves tingled with the realization of how close we were. "I'll take that as a compliment," I said, feeling slightly vulnerable. Our conversation flowed effortlessly after that, touching on everything from favourite books to travel dreams. We talked about things I hadn't discussed with Ethan in years. Nick listened intently, offering thoughtful replies, making me feel truly heard and understood in a way I hadn't experienced for so long. When it was time to leave, Nick leaned closer, his voice gentle but loaded with meaning. I really enjoyed this, Jessica. Maybe we could do it again sometime. My heart pounded as I replied, yes, I'd like that. We parted ways outside the Magnolia Coffee House, but as I walked to my car, I felt the undeniable pull toward him. I wanted to see him again. That unexpected meeting had pushed us deeper into territory we shouldn't have ventured, but retreating now seemed impossible. Several days passed after our cafe meeting, and my emotions swung wildly between excitement and guilt. Thoughts of Nick replayed in my mind, especially the way he looked at me, the way he listened, and how he made me feel alive again. Every time I passed by the Magnolia Coffee House, those thoughts reignited, sending shivers down my spine and filling me with both thrill and remorse. This is crazy, I kept telling myself. But deep down, I knew it was more than just desire. It was a connection I couldn't ignore. One rainy afternoon, as I struggled with a frozen computer at home, I remembered Nick had mentioned that he was good with technology. Without thinking too much about it, I dialed his number. The phone barely rang twice before Nick picked up, his voice warm and familiar. Hey, Jessica. How's it going? Hi, Nick. Sorry to bother you, but I'm having some issues with my computer. You said you're pretty handy with this stuff, right? Do you mind helping me out? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Of course, I'd be happy to help. I'll be over in a bit, he said without hesitation. When he arrived, the tension in the air was palpable. He sat down at my desk, his hands moving confidently across the keyboard as I stood beside him, watching. Our shoulders brushed lightly, and once again, that surge of energy coursed through me. Just a quick fix, Nick murmured, not taking his eyes off the screen. Our faces were closer than I had anticipated, and as our eyes met, I knew it would be difficult to keep this attraction at bay. Before I could stop myself, our lips met in a slow, tentative kiss that soon deepened, unleashing the emotions we had both tried so hard to suppress. When we pulled away, I could hardly breathe. We can't do this, Nick, I whispered, my voice shaky, more as a warning to myself than to him. I know, Jessica. I'm sorry, he replied, his gaze averted, though the apology felt half-hearted. We finished fixing the computer in silence, and Nick quickly left afterward, leaving me with a whirlwind of emotions. As soon as the door closed behind him, I leaned against it, my mind racing. Every touch, every kiss had left a mark, and I knew that this was far from over. A few weeks passed after the party and that kiss with Nick. I tried to avoid him, but my thoughts were constantly consumed by our brief encounters. Ethan was deeply engrossed in his work, as usual, and the routine conversations about Sophia and daily tasks felt more distant than ever. I found myself longing for something more, something beyond the monotony of everyday life. One morning, as I was making breakfast, my phone rang. It was Nick. Jessica, hey. His voice was warm and casual, but there was an underlying tension. I've been thinking. Maybe we should meet and talk. We need to figure this out. My heart raced at the suggestion. All right, Nick, let's meet at the Lavender Grove Park. It'll be quiet there, I said, choosing a place where we could talk without distractions. I dressed carefully, choosing a light blue blouse that clung to my figure and a pair of jeans that made me feel comfortable but confident. In the mirror, I saw a woman who looked put together, but beneath the surface, a storm was brewing. At the park, Nick was already waiting for me near the old stone fountain. He looked anxious but relieved when he saw me approaching. His eyes lingered on me as I sat down beside him. You look beautiful, Jessica, he said softly, his voice almost apologetic. Thanks, Nick, I replied, trying to stay composed. So, what did you want to talk about? Us? He replied, his voice steady but filled with emotion. I can't stop thinking about you. I know it's wrong, but I had to tell you how I feel. His confession made my heart race. I had been trying to suppress the same thoughts, but hearing him say it out loud made it impossible to ignore. We talked about our feelings and what had happened, trying to make sense of the emotions we couldn't push aside. After a while, Nick suggested we take a walk through the park. The lavender trees bloomed along the paths, filling the air with their sweet scent. As we strolled, our conversation became lighter, but the tension between us never truly faded. At one point, Nick stopped walking, gently taking my hand. "Jessica, I know this is wrong, but I can't fight it anymore," he said, his voice trembling. I looked into his eyes, filled with sincerity and desire. Before I could think twice, I leaned in and kissed him. This time the kiss was more passionate, filled with a sense of urgency and longing. His arms wrapped around my waist, pulling me close, and I felt his fingers brush the edge of my blouse. We were lost in the moment, completely oblivious to the world around us. I felt his breath against my skin, and the warmth of his body pressed close to mine. The kiss grew more intense, filled with desperation and desire. For that moment, everything else faded, the consequences, the guilt, the reality of our situation. It was just him and me, lost in the passion that had been building for weeks. When we finally pulled away, both of us were breathless. Our faces remained close, and I could feel the heat radiating between us. "Jessica," Nick whispered, his voice heavy with emotion. "I don't want to hide this anymore. I want to be with you." My mind was spinning. I knew what we were doing was dangerous, but I couldn't deny how deeply I felt for him. Every time we met, the attraction between us grew stronger, more impossible to resist. "I do too, Nick," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. "But we have to be careful. This could destroy everything." Nick pulled me closer, our foreheads resting against each other as we stood there in the quiet park. "I don't care about the risks anymore, Jessica. I just can't keep pretending." We spent hours walking through the Lavender Grove Park, talking about what had happened and what we should do next. Every word, every glance only deepened my connection to him. The thought of being without him felt unbearable, but I knew I had to be cautious. The consequences of giving in to this affair were too great to ignore. As we sat down on a bench beneath the blooming lavender trees, Nick took my hand again, his grip firm and reassuring. "Let's just meet in secret for now. We'll figure out what to do later," he suggested, his eyes searching mine for agreement. I knew it was risky, but the thought of not seeing him again felt like an even greater risk. "Okay, Nick," I agreed, feeling torn between joy and fear. "We'll be careful." We shared another lingering kiss before leaving the park, both of us knowing that this wasn't just a fleeting moment. Our secret meetings became a regular part of our lives, a sanctuary away from the responsibilities and expectations we carried. These secret meetings became our escape. Every time we met at the Lavender Grove Park, hidden away from the rest of the world, it felt like we were the only two people that mattered. We found comfort and excitement in each other, something both of us had been missing in our lives for so long. Our love was forbidden, and yet, that made it all the more intoxicating. Weeks passed, and each day without seeing Nick felt like a lifetime. We kept in touch through brief texts and calls, but the need to be with him grew stronger each time. The tension between my desire to see him and the guilt I felt for hiding it from Ethan became overwhelming. Still, the allure of what we shared was too powerful to let go. One day, when Ethan was working late and Sophia was at a friend's house for the evening, I received a message from Nick. "Jessica, I need to see you. Can I come over?" I knew it was reckless, but I couldn't say no. My heart raced as I typed back a quick reply. "Yes, come over." As I waited for him to arrive, I felt my hands trembling, my pulse quickening with both anticipation and anxiety. I chose a simple yet fitted outfit, a short black skirt and a sleeveless blouse. This time I felt the tension of what I was about to do, knowing how dangerously close we were to being discovered. When the doorbell rang, I nearly jumped. I opened the door to find Nick standing there, his eyes filled with the same desire and longing that had been consuming me. We exchanged a brief look before he stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "Jessica, you look incredible," he whispered, his voice low and filled with emotion. "Thank you, Nick. I've missed you so much," I replied, feeling the familiar warmth flush my cheeks. We stood there, the silence between us growing thicker until the tension became too much to bear. Nick stepped closer, his hands sliding around my waist as he kissed me, deeply and passionately. Our bodies pressed against each other, the intensity of our feelings overwhelming. "Jessica, I can't wait any longer," he whispered between kisses, his voice trembling with need. "Neither can I, Nick," I murmured back, feeling my entire body respond to his touch. His hands moved down, gently lifting my skirt as his fingers traced along my skin, sending shivers through me. The intensity of the moment grew, and I knew we were crossing a line that we could never come back from. As my skirt fell to the floor, Nick's eyes darkened with desire, his hands moving slowly and deliberately, heightening the tension between us. "You're so beautiful, Jessica," he whispered, his voice trembling with passion as he kissed me again, this time with more urgency. I felt his hands slide under my blouse, lifting it gently until it too was gone. Our bodies pressed together, every touch, every kiss igniting something deep within me that I hadn't felt in years. His lips trailed down my neck, sending waves of pleasure through me, and for a moment I forgot everything, my family, my marriage, the consequences. All that mattered was the way he made me feel. "Jessica, I want to be with you always," he murmured, his voice filled with sincerity and longing. "I do too, Nick," I whispered back, my voice thick with emotion, my hands gripping his shoulders as I pulled him closer. I knew in that moment there was no turning back. Our bodies moved in sync, lost in the intensity of the moment, the passion between us taking over. Every touch, every kiss felt like a confession of the love we had tried so hard to deny, and yet here we were, giving into it completely. The room felt small, the world outside seemed to disappear as we surrendered to the desires we had been holding back for so long. Afterward we lay together, our bodies intertwined, a sense of calm settling over us. I looked into Nick's eyes and saw the devotion and love that had been growing between us. It wasn't just about the physical connection. We had found something deeper in each other. "I love you, Jessica," Nick said softly, his voice filled with emotion. "I don't want this to end." Tears filled my eyes as I realized the gravity of our situation. "I love you too, Nick," I replied, my heart torn between the happiness I felt in his arms and the guilt that weighed heavily on me. We stayed like that for what felt like hours, holding each other, savoring the closeness we had longed for. But as the evening grew late, reality began to creep back in. Several days passed since that intimate evening with Nick. At first, I was consumed by the euphoria of our connection, but as time went on, guilt began to gnaw at me. I couldn't stop thinking about Ethan, how I had betrayed the man who had stood by my side for so many years. Ethan was a good husband, and despite our distance, he didn't deserve what I had done. One evening, after Sophia had gone to bed and Ethan came home late from another long day at work, I knew it was time to face the truth. I had to tell him. I couldn't continue living a lie. I prepared a simple dinner, my hands shaking as I set the table. When Ethan sat down, I knew there was no turning back. "Ethan, we need to talk," I began, my voice barely steady as I tried to gather my courage. He looked up from his meal, surprised by the seriousness in my tone. "What's going on, Jessica?" he asked, concern etched across his face. I took a deep breath, feeling my heart race as I struggled to find the words. "There's something that's been wrong between us for a long time. We've grown apart, and I feel like I've lost you. And I made a mistake." Ethan's expression shifted, confusion turning to dread as he seemed to sense what was coming. "I cheated on you, Ethan," I said, my voice breaking as the tears welled up in my eyes. "With Nick." For a moment, he said nothing. The silence was suffocating, and I could see the shock and pain in his eyes. He stared at me, struggling to process the words. Why, Jessica? Why did you do this? His voice trembled, filled with hurt and disbelief. I couldn't hold back the tears any longer. I felt lonely. You were always working, and I didn't know how to reach you anymore. I made a terrible mistake, and I am so, so sorry, I cried, my heart breaking as I saw the devastation on his face. Ethan looked down, his hands gripping the edge of the table as if to steady himself. I thought working hard was what was best for us, for our family. But in doing that, I guess I neglected you. His voice was low, heavy with regret. But Nick, Jessica, he's so much younger. I know, and I never meant for it to happen. But I want to fix this. I still love you, Ethan. And I want to save our family, I pleaded, desperate for him to understand how much I regretted my actions. Ethan sighed heavily, running a hand through his hair as he tried to absorb everything. The pain in his eyes was unmistakable, and it tore at me to see him like that. We've both made mistakes, Jessica, he said quietly after a long pause. I'm not blameless either. I should have been there for you. I got so caught up in work that I forgot what really matters. We sat in silence for a few moments, the weight of everything we'd just said hanging between us. Finally, Ethan stood up and walked over to me. He reached out, taking my hands in his touch gentle but firm. We need to talk about this and we need to fix it, he said, his voice steady but still filled with pain. I don't want to lose you or our family, but we can't pretend this didn't happen. I nodded, tears streaming down my face. I don't want to lose you either, Ethan. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to repair our relationship. Together we decided that the only way forward was to seek help. We agreed to see a family counselor, someone who could help us work through the issues that had led us to this breaking point. It was a step toward healing, but I knew it wouldn't be easy. The days that followed were filled with difficult conversations and painful admissions, but slowly, we began to rebuild the bond that had been damaged. Ethan and I spent more time together, making a conscious effort to reconnect. We talked about things we had neglected for so long, our feelings, our fears, and our hopes for the future. One evening, after one of our counseling sessions, Ethan looked at me with a tenderness I hadn't seen in months. I understand why this happened, he said softly, his eyes meeting mine. And I forgive you. I believe we can move past this, and I want to try. I love you, Jessica, and I want to be a better husband. His words were like a weight lifting off my chest, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt hopeful. Tears of relief filled my eyes, but this time they were tears of hope. I love you too, Ethan. Thank you for giving us a second chance, I whispered, hugging him tightly, feeling the warmth of his embrace as we clung to each other. Our relationship didn't heal overnight, but we were both committed to making it work. Slowly, we started rediscovering the little things that had once brought us together. We learned to appreciate each other again, finding joy in simple moments, sharing breakfast in the morning, laughing over small things, or simply sitting together in comfortable silence. The affair with Nick had taught me a harsh lesson. It wasn't just about physical desire, it was about the emotional void I hadn't addressed. Ethan and I began to focus on filling that gap, communicating in ways we hadn't for years. We worked to restore the trust that had been broken step by step, day by day. Several months passed and our efforts started to show. Our connection was growing stronger. Our family felt more solid. We still had challenges ahead of us, but we faced them together. One evening, Ethan came home from work with a bouquet of roses, my favourite. It was a simple gesture, but one that reminded me how much had changed between us. "Hi, honey," he said, smiling warmly as he handed me the flowers. "I know it's been a long road, but I want you to know how much I appreciate everything we've worked through." "Hi, Ethan," I replied, my heart swelling with emotion. "Thank you. You don't know how much this means to me." We sat together on the couch, enjoying the quiet after a busy day. I leaned into him, feeling his strong arms wrap around me. The warmth of his embrace was comforting, and in that moment, I knew we were finally on the right path. "Jessica, I'm so glad we didn't give up on each other," Ethan said softly. "You and Sophia are the most important people in my life, and I'll never let us grow apart again." Tears welled up in my eyes as I looked at him. "I feel the same way, Ethan. These last few months have shown me how much I love you and how much I want our family to stay strong. I promise we'll keep working at this together." We sat in the warmth of our home, feeling closer than we had in a long time. The love between us had been tested, but it had also grown deeper, more resilient. The next day, we decided to spend some quality time together as a family. We packed a picnic and headed back to the Lavender Grove Park, the same place where Nick and I had met in secret. But now the park took on a new meaning, a place of healing where Ethan, Sophia, and I could create new happy memories. Sophia was overjoyed as we spread out the blanket near the pond, her laughter filling the air as we played games and enjoyed the sunshine. Ethan had prepared sandwiches and snacks, and we spent the afternoon talking, laughing, and appreciating each other's company. At one point, I glanced over at Ethan as he chased Sophia around with playful energy, his laughter echoing across the field. I smiled, feeling a deep sense of peace wash over me. This was true happiness, my family, whole and united. As the day drew to a close, we sat together on the blanket, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The sky turned shades of orange and pink, and Ethan wrapped his arm around me, pulling me close. "Jessica," he began, his voice filled with warmth and sincerity, "I want you to know how grateful I am for everything we have now. You and Sophia are my world, and I promise I'll never take that for granted again." Tears of gratitude welled in my eyes as I rested my head on his shoulder. "I feel the same way, Ethan. We've been through so much, but we came out stronger. I know we can face anything as long as we do it together." We sat there watching the sunset, our hearts beating in unison. It felt like a new chapter in our lives, a chapter filled with hope, forgiveness, and love. The road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but we were ready to face it together. Thanks for watching. The next story is ready and just as thrilling. Subscribe to catch new stories every day.